Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So, I know it's been a while since I've posted a new video, and I think by the end of this vid, you'll understand why. Today I have something a bit different to share with you all. I'm going to ask you to bear with me because things are about to get a little strange. I guess you could say I've been going down a bit of a rabbit hole lately. Well, that's putting it lightly. I don't really know where to start with this, so I guess I'll just tell you what happened. A while back, I started getting these emails. Nothing outright cryptic, just vague references to something I should check out. And then one day, I get a file attachment. A program. Not an installer, not a zip, just a single executable. nnru_michael_2.exe. Now, obviously, I wasn't about to just run some random exe on my machine. I'm not that stupid. First thing I did was scan it, and wouldn't you know it, it came up clean. But you never know, right? So I did what you would do when you don't trust a file. I spun up a virtual machine. Isolated environment, offline, nothing mission critical, just a sandbox to see what it would actually do. I expected it to crash, or hang, or maybe install something shady in the background. I've seen malware that tries to hide, but this? Nothing. No outbound connections, no registry changes. It just sat there waiting. That was already weird. At first glance, it seems to be some kind of locally hosted wiki software, sort of like Zim, I guess, with a fan wiki included of a band named Family Reunion. And if you know me, you know I get a lot of music recommendations. Maybe this was just an elaborate way of saying, hey, you should check out this weird obscure band. After all, I do talk about music sometimes. I'm opinionated, kind of a pop formalist. No big deal, right? But then I started clicking around, and that's when I realized I can't access the index. It doesn't make sense. Most wikis have a table of contents, an all pages section, a sitemap, something. But here, there's nothing. Just the home page, a short list of some of the articles, and whatever pages I can find through internal links. There's a search function, but if I don't already know what I'm looking for, I have no way of finding anything. There has to be a complete index somewhere. I mean, the program obviously knows what's in the database. It can fetch articles on demand, but I can't see the full list on the front end of this thing. So I did what any rational person would do. I checked the files themselves. I figured if this thing is running locally, it has to store its database somewhere. Sure enough, buried in a resource folder created on first launch, I find a file labeled index.db.enc. It's encrypted. That means the software itself can decrypt and retrieve articles on demand, but I can't just open the index myself. Why? I have no idea. But that raises an even bigger question. Why encrypt it at all? What is this program keeping from me? I guess I should mention at this point that I've been attempting to create a map of this wiki for about a month now, and I still feel as though I've barely scratched the surface. So I've been trying to put together a comprehensive list of all the articles, what leads where, what's been edited, etc. The challenge is that there's only a small sliver of articles listed on the wiki's main page. Now, I can access other articles through various hyperlinks similar to the way you might go down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, but as I've worked through the wiki, I found that the hyperlinks only get you so far. So the only other way to discover content on this wiki is by refreshing the main page. See, there's this featured section that changes every time you reload, but it doesn't just cycle through the same dozen or so pages. At first, I thought it did, but then I started keeping track and I kept finding new content. So I kept pushing it further. I'd refresh 20, 30, even 100 times in a row just to see how deep it went. And every time, the wiki gave me a little more. It's almost as though, don't make me say it, folks, this wiki is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Okay, maybe that's a bit dramatic, but look, this website is kind of weird. Folks, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. It's got fuck vibes. I don't know how else to describe it. Something is off, and I'm unnerved by it. The more I look into it, the more unnerved I get. I figure maybe we can be unnerved together, so let's take a little journey, if you will. This is the Michael 2 Iceberg, or the wiki that shouldn't exist. How this iceberg works. Each layer gets weirder as we descend. The surface layer is stuff that slaps you in the face right away. The band, the lore, the contradictions, so obvious they might as well be written on a neon sign. The middle layer is more like connective tissue. Recurring names, oddly specific gear choices, disgruntled ex-band members. The deeper layer is where the wiki starts gaslighting you. Alt history timelines, vanishing sources, and the creeping suspicion that key information is being withheld. The even deeper layer is full-on epistemological vertigo. Disputed memories, contested documents, unresolved absences. And the deepest layer? That's where we talk about the being, and the index file that knows when you're truly ready to hear dark truths, like a psychoanalytic clippy. This isn't just an iceberg video per se. It's more like an ontology puzzle wrapped in a shoegaze discography that may or may not exist. I understand that may not be for everyone, but if you stay with me, I guarantee it will at least be unique. Surface layer. Alright, I've been taking notes, kids, and I think I'm starting to put the pieces together. So we're going to go over the basics first. These are the aspects of the wiki that I found to be most glaring, if that makes sense. Some of this might seem a bit trivial at first, but we need to go over it because it's kind of like a Monet painting. For you uncultured cretins out there, Monet is the guy who painted those blurry water lilies you've probably seen in tote bags and stuff. The point is, when you look at his paintings up close, it's a chaotic mess of brushstrokes. But when you zoom out, it becomes a bit more cohesive. The thing with this wiki is, we need to look at the brushstrokes first because it's in these tiny, seemingly random details that you start to identify certain threads. I've ordered this deliberately. Midwest shoegaze. Okay, so apparently Family Reunion was part of the Midwest shoegaze scene. This is not a genre I've heard of. I mean, I know Midwest emo, American football, anyone? But I don't know any Midwest shoegaze. So at first I'm like, this must be a fairly niche variant of shoegaze or something, right? Now, again, for you unlettered dunces out there, if you don't know what shoegaze is, allow me to provide a bit of context. Shoegaze is this sort of dreamy, noisy, effects-laden style of rock that first emerged in southern England in the late 80s. It's called shoegaze because the guitarists spent so much time looking down at their pedal boards during shows. They were literally gazing at their shoes, you know? Kinda dumb, but that's the name of the genre and it stuck. Iconic bands like My Bloody Valentine, Ride, and Slowdive basically wrote the playbook for the genre. As a pop formalist, I'm skeptical of all this noise shit, frankly. Chapter House is pretty good, but I digress. Shoegaze kind of peaked in the early 90s, and then everyone collectively decided they'd had enough of it and moved on to even more annoying genres like Britpop. Ugh. Now back to the wiki. This article on Midwest shoegaze states the following. According to Morgan Sinclair, a critic from the St. Louis Sound, Midwest shoegaze morphed the ethereal drift of UK shoegaze into a sound that reflected the monotonous reality of suburban America. Hey, that sounds pretty good, but is it snappy? I guess I'll go ahead and mention here that I don't have any actual sound recordings of this band. Oh, and by the way, I googled Morgan Sinclair, and as far as I can tell, there are no notable music critics by that name. At first, I thought, well, there's plenty of obscure music critics out there. What do I know? The wiki says, the lyrical approach of Midwest shoegaze is generally noted for its bipolar nature, oscillating between heartfelt sincerity and nihilistic detachment. This sardonic tone often concealed a deeper commentary on the struggles of suburban youth, particularly in the lower middle class, grappling with desire for an escape or a deeper meaning amidst the repetitive cycles of suburban life. This approach provided a voice and a perspective that resonated with an audience experiencing similar feelings. Now, what does that remind you of? Shoegaze was mainstream? Huh? Now, according to this wiki article, Family Reunion is part of the reason shoegaze surpassed grunge in the 90s in terms of popularity. And I'm over here thinking, that did not happen, bro. Much to my chagrin, grunge went on to spawn countless Eddie Vedder copycats well into the 2000s. And shoegaze? Well, shoegaze basically faded into obscurity until some Zoomer hipsters started listening to it during the pandemic. And I guess if you're discovering My Bloody Valentine for the first time while enduring the never-ending sort of cabin fever of the early 2020s, I can kind of see the appeal. But that was just a small resurgence. I mean, we're not exactly talking Nirvana levels, not even close. So what exactly is going on here, bucko? Hold that thought. Family reunion. Basic history. Okay, so I figured this is the opportune time to go over the band's basic history. This is just a cursory overview based on the band's Portal description. In fact, I'm just going to read the description because it's relatively short. So here goes. Family Reunion was a Midwest shoegaze band that emerged from the unassuming suburbs of Illinois in the 1990s. Their music, specifically the album Michael II, effectively captured the quiet discontent of their environment. The band was led by James Rose, whose unexplained disappearance in 1998 largely overshadowed the band's growing cult following. Details about his appearance have grown increasingly fragmented. Investigators and aficionados alike tend to speculate about Rose's disappearance, and theories range from outlandish to borderline delusional. Despite their relatively brief run, Family Reunion's music continues to resonate with many to this day. It is sadly the case that the band's brief history is now eroding as if it never happened. This wiki exists to preserve those remaining details before they too disappear into the ether of forgotten knowledge. Now, at first glance, this reads like your run-of-the-mill cult band with a tragic backstory kind of thing. And to be fair, rock music is essentially built on the bones of musicians who died too young because the system chewed them up and spit them out, you know? This whole thing kind of reminds me of Richie Edwards from Manic Street Preachers, but the more I look into it, the more things feel increasingly off. I think you'll see what I mean as this video progresses, but I do just want to note a few things here. First of all, the lack of available music is weird. I mean, if Family Reunion was really as influential as this wiki claims, where's the evidence for that? Even the most obscure forgotten shoegaze bands from the 90s have something to back up their existence. Some grainy bootleg footage of a live set, some lo-fi demo floating around SoulSeek, something, you know? But with Family Reunion, I've got absolutely nothing to go on other than the strange wiki database. No YouTube uploads, no bootlegs, no Discogs listings. It's like the band just evaporated. And before you say, well, Amy, maybe they were just really underground. No. According to this wiki, they weren't just some niche band. They were instrumental in shoegaze taking over grunge in the 90s, which, again, did not happen. Then there's this guy, James Rose, the frontman. The wiki describes him in almost mythical terms. Enigmatic, deeply private, yet somehow every detail of his life is carefully documented in this wiki. We'll get into the details later. For now, I just want to note that there are all these references to him being obsessed with control, and specifically with documentation, like making sure every aspect of their production process was recorded and archived. And yet, it seems as though nothing has survived. No interviews, no studio footage, no verifiable proof that this guy existed outside of this wiki. The other thing is, well, this wiki seems like it was written with a sense of urgency. It's not some dry factual recounting of events. It's more so like the authors are trying to preserve something that is slipping away. The wiki keeps emphasizing how information about the band is eroding, how their story is fading into obscurity, like history itself is actively trying to delete them or something. I'll be honest, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here because there's a lot to unpack about these wiki contributors, and trust me, we will unpack it. But for now, I just want to emphasize that this band's history has way too many gaps, contradictions, and outright impossibilities for me to believe any of it at face value. So why do all this? For the sake of this Iceberg video, I'm going to go ahead and suspend my disbelief. Middle layer. Okay, so I didn't quite know what to make of this wiki at first. But what I've gone over thus far was enough to pique my interest, you know? And then when I started digging deeper, I got this strange feeling. If I had to describe it, it's something akin to deja vu, I guess. I'm keeping it light on the personal details, what with this being the internet and all, but I will say that some of the stuff resonates with me in ways that are hard to articulate. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get into it. The Gibson Nighthawk. Alright, so this band's frontman was apparently known for playing a Gibson Nighthawk, which is sort of interesting in and of itself, really, because the Nighthawk is a unique guitar. Congrats to this wiki for touching on one of my special interests. So the Nighthawk is sort of Gibson's take on a Fender guitar. That's the idea, at least. They were kind of trying to, pick off some of Fender's customers, I guess. But this model didn't quite take off because, well, if you're looking for a Fender sound, you're probably just going to buy a Fender. It kind of seems like Gibson didn't do their market research, but what do I know? Long story short, the Nighthawk is kind of Gibson's new Coke in a way. Zoomers aren't going to get that reference, but whatever. In fact, look, I've always been a Fender girly, but I actually have a Nighthawk for reasons that I won't get into right now. Weird coincidence. I will say if you can find one for a decent price, I highly recommend picking it up. The bridge is thin, which is good for my little hands. It has a bright tone, obviously kind of similar to a Strat. This thing can even approximate the Telecaster's tone if you ask me. It's a damn good guitar, and they're getting harder to come by these days. That's enough talking shop for now. Back to the wiki. Band name origin. So the band's name was actually inspired by something that happened to the original drummer, Bertram Fortson. That's a name, apparently. In fact, remember that name because it's going to come up again. So one time, young Bertram went to a family reunion and it broke out in some kind of insane brawl. And so to him, the term family reunion was always imbued with this kind of traumatic significance. Kind of like me and the Nighthawk, but I digress. Anyway, I guess they thought that family reunion might be a good band name. It was kind of an inside joke. It carried a certain subtext that the public was not privy to. But get this. Bertram was very quickly ousted from the band. Apparently, he was going through a hard time because his little brother was killed at a track meet by a stray shot put, and young Bertram was acting out, getting into all sorts of trouble. At a certain point, the band just ghosted him. They re-recorded his parts with another drummer and didn't tell him. Pretty shitty, right? Kind of like what Dave Grohl did to the Sunny Day Real Estate drummer. Dave Grohl, not looking too good lately, are you, pal? Old heads know you've been kind of a stinker this whole time. But again, I digress. So they kicked Bertram out of the band in this really passive-aggressive sort of manner. And when I say they, I am mainly referring to the frontman and the lead guitarist. It seems to me that these two fellows were the primary creative forces in the band, as far as I can tell based on these articles. Which brings me to my next point. The lawsuit. Years later, Bertram sues the band and tries to claim that the idea for the name was his, and they were using it illegally. It didn't hold up in court. To quote the wiki, the ruling found no substantial evidence to support his contributions or his role in naming the band. Poor Bertram never really got closure on the whole kicking him out of the band thing. He did, however, have a change of heart after a certain event that we will discuss in due time. Randy Shaw, the bassist. Now we're getting into the messier stuff. People close to the band. People who have complicated lives. Take Randall Shaw, for example, the bassist for Family Reunion. Shaw, as the wiki tells us, was born into a pretty affluent family, at least relative to the other band members. His dad owned a car dealership, Shaw Pontiac of Bridgeview. He lived a petite bourgeois existence, as they say. But young Randy rejected the family business. Reading this wiki, it seems like he had a bit of a complex because his family's wealth kind of made him less punk in the eyes of others in the scene. And well, I've always said owners of car dealerships are invariably fascist adjacent at best, so that's an entirely appropriate reaction. But so get this. Randy has this big falling out with his sweet papa because he doesn't want to follow in his dad's footsteps and work at the dealership. Can't say I blame him. What a hellish existence. In Family Reunion, Randy seemed to defer to others in the band on creative matters, but by all accounts he was a competent and even quite skilled bassist. I don't have access to the music, so who can say really? but think more Chris Novoselic as opposed to Paul McCartney, I suppose. Anyway, if this wiki is any indication, Randy's life was full of contradictions. He was known for his reckless behavior during his family reunion days. There's a story about how he got into a fight with some frat boys during a show in St. Louis. Apparently, the fight left him with a concussion and a broken hand. After that, he tried to clean up his act, but he had a lot of demons. Drinking problems, relationship struggles, etc., etc. I have to say I kind of relate. I'm in this tweet and I don't like it. After the band separated, Shaw went back to his dad's dealership, even though it seemed like the last thing he ever wanted. Kinda sad. And here's where it gets weirder. Years later, Shaw reemerges, but not in the music scene. The wiki states, while Shaw swore off his father's car dealership as a teenager, he eventually returned to his family home in Palos Hills and took on a more significant role at his family's business. By his mid-30s, Shaw was less concerned with class politics and more annoyed by what he described as the IRS and state of Illinois joining forces to bleed him dry. The family business Shaw once resented for embodying his father's capitalistic values later became the funding source for his anti-tax crusade. For me, it's all about personal freedom, Shaw said in an interview, lounging on the patio of a suburban home with a whiskey sour in hand. Well, that paints a picture, don't it? I am actually burying the lead here. This man deadass ran for governor of Illinois as a libertarian. His campaign didn't get much traction, but here's the kicker. Shaw's participation in the race supposedly siphoned votes away from the Republican candidate, which sparked a lot of criticism. He only got 2% of the vote, but apparently that was enough to screw the grand old party. Then there's this other thing. Shaw wrote an op-ed for a Chicago newspaper during his campaign, arguing for lowering the age of consent. Yeah, that didn't go over well. He later disavowed it, claiming he was influenced by the wrong people. But the damage was done. Hey, maybe that concussion he received earlier in life gave him brain damage. That's the only reason I can think of as to why you might become a libertarian. But I digress. To be clear, I can't find any evidence of this guy running for governor. I mean, I know he was low profile, but there should be some record of it, right? Deeper layer. Alright folks, here's what the meat of this video is, and I assure you, it's grade A sirloin, or what's a good cut of steak, I don't know honestly. Bob Temple. The wiki references this guy Bob Temple multiple times, so what's that about? Temple's apparently a music critic. I haven't heard of him, but then again, I'm not exactly an authority on music criticism. I have my tastes, and I don't really care what critics think. Unless we're talking about melon, of course. That smooth, soft head of his just gives me the vapors. Anyway, Temple is a music critic who was deeply connected to Family Reunion. He wrote extensively about their work, especially after the release of Michael 2. He gave it a 9 out of 10, which is pretty high for a discerning music connoisseur like Bob Temple. The wiki article says, Temple's collegiate journey began at Brigham Young University, BYU. Temple's time at BYU was marked by a growing disillusionment with the institution's conservative ethos, which clashed with his personal beliefs and identity. Looking back at my time at BYU, it feels like a bad dream, Temple later reflected. It was a world that never really aligned with who I was or what I believed in. This disconnect ultimately contributed to his decision to leave the university. During his freshman year at BYU, Temple came out as gay, leading to a painful estrangement from his family. This was a pivotal moment that led him to leave both BYU and Salt Lake City behind. He moved to Chicago in search of a fresh start in a community where he felt like he could belong. I feel that, Bob. Utah is not your scene. Anyway, Temple was known for his unique stream of consciousness writing style, and his book Immolate the Bait, On the Road with Family Reunion, became a New York Times bestseller. But here's where things start to get a little weird. In the wiki article for Mr. Temple, there's an entire section devoted to his experiences with the band. He supposedly followed them on tour, writing detailed accounts of their performances in Immolate the Bait. But that book? I can't find a single copy. It's referenced in multiple articles, but it's like the book doesn't actually exist in any tangible form. Temple mentions the band being instrumental in shoegaze becoming a popular genre in the 90s. Again, something that doesn't reflect the reality we know. Shoegaze never really broke through to the mainstream like that. So where's this version of history coming from? This leads me to my next point. Michael 2. Okay, so here's where things start getting interesting. And by interesting, I mean completely deranged. Apparently, the thing that Family Reunion is most well known for is this weird concept album called Michael 2. Michael 2 is their magnum opus. Their Loveless, their Disintegration, if you will. Their Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. Is that enough references for you? So, this album came out in 1998 under Lurch Records. The frontman, James Rose, is said to have written most of the songs, and the production is credited to some guy named Vox Rich. This is widely assumed to be one of Rose's pseudonyms, which, sure, fine, musicians do that all the time. If this Wiki article is any indication, this entire album was produced in the basement of Rose's family home. There's this anecdote about his mom making sandwiches for the band while they worked, which is cute, honestly, but I kept getting stuck on the fact that this dude supposedly laid down layers upon layers of overdubs in what was essentially his mom's laundry room. We're talking hours of vocal takes, meticulously crafted guitar textures, and God knows what else. It says here, some reviews criticized the album for what they perceived as poor production quality and a lack of thematic cohesion. However, such criticism was largely overshadowed by the album's acclaim and the profound impact it had within the alternative music community. Alright, let's talk about the track list, because, folks, this thing is a mess. It does have precisely the kind of unhinged energy you'd expect from an album written by a guy who spent way too much time alone in his mom's basement. I Won't Be By Your Side. Kicking things off with abandonment issues. Solid start, perhaps a little dramatic, but this is shoegaze, so that comes with the territory, I suppose. Michael 2, title track. Seems kind of important. Limited Hangout. Now, for the uninitiated, a limited hangout is a tactic where you admit part of the truth to distract people from the actual truth. Just putting that out there. Totally not ominous at all. Take It Back. This is the only song I have found thus far with an actual article associated with it. The Wrong Type of Angel. You know this guy had a crisis of faith at some point. When You're Around. Alright, this sounds normal. Probably a love song. If it turns out to be about the inevitability of entropy or the heat death of the universe, I'm going to be very upset. Bingo at Jared's. Is Jared running some kind of underground bingo racket? Is this a metaphor or something? Is it literally about bingo at some guy's house? No notes, just questions. Judgment Day. Okay, hold on. We just went from Bingo at Jared's to Judgment Day in the span of one track. That is a violent tonal shift. Someone check on Jared. Immolate the Bait. This is a song Bob Temple named his book after, which makes me suspicious. Also, immolate means to sacrifice by burning, so, real chill vibes on this one. Compromise to a permanent end. So first we had Limited Hangout, and now we have Compromise to a permanent end. I'm beginning to notice a theme emerging. This is the most CIA-sounding album I've ever come across. Michael 2 Redux. What's it to you? Okay, so there are 2 title tracks, but why does it sound like James Rose got defensive about it halfway through naming the song? Take It Back. So, out of the entire album, Take It Back is the only track I've found thus far with its own dedicated wiki page. The article describes Take It Back as the final confrontation between the Archangel Michael and a powerful seraph tasked with vanquishing him after his descent into madness. Some interpretations suggest the track functions as a flash forward or a circular narrative. The prevailing theme is regret, though interpretations vary. One passage in the article states, Michael's final request for a cigarette and a frozen meal would seem to be an absurd contrast in the context of an epic celestial battle. The dark humor of this particular moment has led some to interpret the song as a meditation on the compulsion to pursue mortal desires when faced with certain death. The imagery is striking, but the reasoning behind it is ambiguous. The article provides an unusually detailed breakdown of the song's instrumentation. The use of a rat distortion pedal, boss chorus pedal, and Electro-Harmonix Memory Man delay is noted as key to its sound. Rose originally played the bridge in standard tuning, but struggled with a sus2 chord. That is pretty hard in standard tuning, especially if you have little hands like me. So Rose switched to drop D, and the lead guitarist Matthew Pontius Semble mocked him for it, going so far as to throw a beer at Rose's head during the session. The sound of this beer can actually made it into the final mix. The lyrics to Take It Back are cryptic and open to interpretation. I want to have a smoke, I want a lean cuisine. I want to have a smoke, I want a lean cuisine. I want to have a smoke, I want to be the dean. The first two lines are mundane. The third is harder to place. If dean refers to an academic position, the connection is unclear. At any rate, it's worth questioning at this point why Take It Back is the only song given this level of documentation. There are no surviving interviews, no archived reviews, no bootlegs, just this. Maybe it was a single, maybe it was just a fan favorite, or maybe it's the only thing that survived. That doesn't necessarily mean it was the most important track. It just means, for whatever reason, this is what remains. Anachronisms and historical inconsistencies. Then there's this glaring issue with the Wiki. It states that Bob Dole won the 1996 presidential election instead of Bill Clinton. Remember Bob Dole from those old Viagra commercials? Zoomers, Viagra was like the Blue Chew of the 90s. Anyway, this might be before your time, but I actually remember sitting in front of our living room TV watching the 96 election results come in. Little Amy was too young to be partisan, but I do remember my father's somber look of disappointment when Clinton destroyed Dole. I just remember him staring past the TV as though peering into the void and saying, well, there goes the country. Look, here's the electoral map. It wasn't even close. But this wiki makes quite a few references to a Dole presidency, multiple terms even. The whole thing is written like it's common knowledge that Dole became president, and it goes into detail about policies he supposedly enacted. It's not the only inconsistency either. The deeper I dig, the more things just don't add up. I've come to the conclusion that the various historical incongruities throughout this wiki cannot be attributed to mere typos or minor errors. Now, recall the lyrics to Take It Back, specifically that line about lean cuisine. I want to have a smoke, I want a lean cuisine. According to the wiki, this is supposedly a reference to the rising cost of frozen meals under Dole's new economic agenda. Interestingly, the app includes a number of preserved snapshots of certain websites, static archive pages, similar to the way archive.org preserves old pages using the Wayback Machine. One of these is a strange essay referenced in the Family Reunion wiki titled Dole's Last Stand, a gonzo tale from the edge of the new American empire. It's like some pretentious reactionary's attempt at fear and loathing, except in this instance the stakes are, I don't even know. It reads like a fever dream, like Dole's electoral victory was the crux of some historical shift. The essay goes into strange details about Dole's campaign. It talks about the final weeks, how Clinton's charm started to feel insincere, and how a younger, more radical advisor helped rebrand Dole, not as a run-of-the-mill candidate, but as this unstoppable force of nature. According to this essay, Dole was positioned as the only one who could stop the collapse of the American spirit, like some kind of grim anti-hero. The essay states, and I quote, "The so-called New Democrats, with their centrist triangulation and their repackaging of old neoliberal ideas as fresh innovations, had sold themselves as the future. But their future was a lie, a plastic vision of endless consumption, of comfortable lives built on the backs of cheap labor and overseas wars. They were caretakers of a system designed to fail, standing on the shoulders of Reaganomics, slapping a blue coat of paint on the very same edifice. The voters weren't blind to it anymore. Clinton's welfare reform, his obsession with globalization, the slick speeches about building a bridge to the 21st century, it was all a shallow mirage, an invitation to ride along the slow, spiraling decline into mediocrity. In their hands, democracy was nothing but a sedative, numbing the people to their own enslavement. They promised stability, but Dole offered something more primal, an end to the illusion." The essay goes on to describe Dole's rallies in the final weeks of the campaign turning into wild events, almost cult-like, where young people were drawn to Dole not because he inspired hope, but because he offered something darker. The essay is written in this weird gonzo style, chaotic, full of energy, sort of a vitalist text, but it's a bit unsettling. It describes the final debate between Clinton and Dole as a total blowout in Dole's favor. Dole was the grim truth no one wanted to face, and finally a mass of people seemed to recognize the historical necessity of his new American project. Enough people to win him the election, at least. There's a great deal more to discuss when it comes to the sort of socio-political angle of this wiki. I'm starting to wonder, was this part of the band's lore? Is this some kind of Andy Kaufman type bit or something? For now, I just want to take a second to point out that I'm aware this must be some sort of metafictional narrative, I suppose. I'm not exactly a scholar per se, but this whole thing practically reeks of postmodernism. And look, this alt history stuff is pretty interesting, but it's not the primary reason I think this wiki database has fucked vibes. We haven't even gotten to that stuff yet. Matthew Pontius Semble. Alright, I put MPS in the deeper layer because I think there's more to this fellow than meets the eye. So apparently, Matthew Pontius Semble was the lead guitarist of the band. The wiki article for this guy states that he was previously in a punk band called Piss Academy. He had some legal trouble back in the day. Specifically, he spent 2 years in prison for attacking a police officer. But according to this interview referenced in the wiki, the cop in question was later busted for planting evidence in other cases. So I guess it's fair to question the veracity of the charges against him. There's a weirdly mythical vibe to this Semble, particularly in relation to his contributions to Michael II. He apparently co-wrote a song for the album called Immolate the Bait, which ended up being a very popular single according to this wiki. The song is described as being the heart of the album's unsettling, fragmented narrative. Now, after the band split, MPS didn't exactly fade into obscurity. He ended up joining Lurch Records, the label that first signed Family Reunion, and worked his way up to president of the whole damn company. So, punk rocker turned corporate exec. Make of that what you will. Personally, I find this all to be rather odd. Like, it's not very often you see this kind of career transition. There is also this section in his wiki about his marriage to a woman named Phaedra Gray, who is apparently the heiress to some extremely lucrative business, Gray and Partners. GMP is described as a fictive kin brokerage. I have no idea what that is or why it would be profitable. I googled the term fictive kin, and honestly, that raised more questions than it answered. But I'm getting off topic. At this point, I guess I just want to impress upon you that there are all sorts of theories about this guy. Even deeper layer, the disappearance of James Rose. Here's where the floor drops out, and I need to slow down and actually explain it. According to the wiki, the last confirmed sighting of James Rose is February 22nd, 1998, after a local show outside Chicago. The rest of Family Reunion is doing their unglamorous post-set routine, coiling cables, hauling amps, and apparently arguing with the sound guy about the monitor mix. Meanwhile, Rose walks backstage and just doesn't come back out. There isn't a dramatic exit, there isn't a note, there isn't a late-night voicemail from Rose explaining that he needs to go find himself in a desert commune or some hippie bullshit like that. 1 second he's there, the next he's a blank space where a person should be. It's worth noting that Rose's childhood was not exactly a Leave It to Beaver type situation. The wiki gives one compact block about adolescence, a father who abandons him when he's 9, and anxiety severe enough that he's homeschooled from 10th grade onward, unexplained seizures in his early teens that later stop, a few concussions tied to those episodes. By the time he's 15, the ledger already looks pretty rough. As a young adult, he drops out of UIC's computer science program to throw himself into the band. He records Michael 2 in his mom's basement, plays a Gibson Nighthawk, and, this is important, develops a somewhat notorious reputation for wanting everything documented and archived. That last bit matters because it clashes with what we actually have now. No music, no footage, no outside proof of the band's existence beyond this very wiki. He tried to nail things down, but the nails aren't here. When you consider the guy's childhood experiences, you start to see why he gravitated toward controlled spaces and repeatable routines. He was trying to establish some level of stability that was not present during his childhood. That's not in the wiki, to be clear. Just a bit of psychoanalytic insight from yours truly. Rose's disappearance sparked endless speculation, rumors of breakdowns, cults, accidents, or secret projects. But one detail from the wiki stands out. In a 2005 interview, Bertram Fortson, the once bitter ex-roommate who had sued Rose and the band, sounded unexpectedly reflective. He said, "Looking back, I wish things had gone differently. The lawsuit, the arguments, they seem so insignificant now. I miss Jim. He was more than just a fellow bandmate. He was my best friend. I really wish I knew what happened to him." According to a post in the talk page for his Wiki article, Fortson helped organize early search efforts. He even printed flyers. I don't want to read too much into it, but it's hard not to feel something when you trace his trajectory, from founding member to antagonist to a quiet, lonely footnote. Maybe he was trying to make amends in the only way he could. Or maybe he just wanted to feel like he was still part of the story. There's also the journal. The entry on his posthumous book, The Journals of James Rose, says it was published by Breakhouse Media in 2005. I have not read the book. Per usual, there is literally no record of this book or Breakhouse Media ever existing. But from what I do have access to, the wiki summary is very specific about one thing. The Journals of James Rose were heavily edited before publication. Portions were removed to avoid potential legal liabilities involving living persons. And Rose's sister is named as the person who pushed for those omissions after a back and forth with the publisher's lawyers and editors. What is in the published volume, per the summary, is fairly straightforward. Lists of the bands he loved and a lot of material about making Michael 2. Pressure after the debut, frustrations with parts of the process, the usual artist versus expectations type shit. The wiki's verdict on the whole package is essentially that it's quite illuminating, but ultimately an incomplete picture, and it notes that the fans argue more about what was cut than the actual content of the journals. Back to the night he vanished. The family's views are split in a way that feels painfully human. His mother believes he's alive somewhere but unable to reach them for some reason. His sister believes that if he could have called, he would have, and we shouldn't romanticize what prolonged silence usually means. In other words, the man's dead in a ditch somewhere. The wiki doesn't try to adjudicate between those views, it presents both and moves on. And yes, there are theories, lots of them. Over the years, 5 major theories have emerged to explain James Rose's disappearance, each with its own proponents, shortcomings, and implications. The wiki's entry takes a measured tone, summarizing them not as definitive answers, but as common lines of speculation. Here's how each is presented. Foul play. This is the most sensational theory, but also the most emotionally compelling for some longtime fans. It hinges on the idea that Rose made enemies, whether due to internal conflicts within the music industry or because of his increasingly outspoken comments and interviews during the Michael 2 era. The name most frequently cited in association with this angle is journalist P. Feldman, who argued that there was more going on behind the scenes than people realized. Feldman points to a series of vague threats Rose reportedly received, as well as a few abrupt changes in Family Reunion's touring plans in late 1997. However, the theory leans heavily on implication. There's no publicly confirmed police investigation, no body, no conclusive evidence. It persists largely because people want a villain in this story, and because a clean narrative, even a dark one, is easy to live with in the gnawing ambiguity of an unexplained disappearance. Voluntary disappearance. This theory suggests that Rose simply walked away from the pressure. Fans who support this idea often cite passages from the aforementioned journals, which hint at deep burnout, disillusionment, and alienation. He was reportedly frustrated with the direction of Michael II, at odds with his label and facing mounting scrutiny after the band's sudden rise to fame. Some speculate he staged his disappearance deliberately to start a new life. But this theory also falters under scrutiny. There have been no confirmed sightings of Rose since February 1998, no slip-ups, no confirmed use of his social security number. For someone trying to escape the limelight, he managed to vanish without a trace in an era before digital surveillance made that nearly impossible, a fact that either lends the theory credibility or makes it harder to swallow, depending on your angle. For what it's worth, this is the simplest explanation, and per Occam's razor, it's probably the best explanation. Mental health crisis. This theory posits that Rose's disappearance was the result of severe psychological breakdown. It's one of the few theories grounded in Rose's documented history. He suffered from anxiety as early as his preteen years, had what his bandmates vaguely referred to as neurological issues that occasionally impacted touring, and was pulled out of school in 10th grade due to reoccurring panic attacks. Supporters of this explanation argue that the signs were there all along: increasingly cryptic lyrics, erratic public statements, and a growing retreat from public life in the months before he vanished. Unlike the other theories, this one doesn't require conspiracies or reinvention, just an unglamorous breakdown that no one caught in time. But wouldn't there be evidence of it? A mentally ill person usually doesn't have the capability to hide their tracks so well. Government involvement. This theory only gained traction after the Wiki itself started surfacing connections between Family Reunion's music and broader themes of surveillance, censorship, and state power, threads that were mostly ignored at the time of their original release. Some contributions note that Rose was corresponding with several fringe journalists in the final year of his public life, and that Michael II contains lyrics which, in retrospect, read as oddly prescient about domestic surveillance programs later exposed in the early 2000s. That said, the Wiki is careful not to overstate the case. It acknowledges that there's little in the way of concrete evidence, and that much of the theory is driven by pattern recognition and a distrust of official narratives. It's included largely to catalog the discourse, not to validate this or any particular theory. Fringe/paranormal theories. Finally, there are theories so speculative they exist more to be cataloged than endorsed. These include claims that Rose experienced some kind of metaphysical event, that he accessed a hidden reality, or that he was the subject of an experiment tied to a secret government project. Others cite Rose's growing interest in Gnostic texts, dream journaling, and reality fatigue, a term he supposedly used in a 1997 letter. These explanations are typically lumped together with a disclaimer. The Wiki doesn't endorse them, but acknowledges their persistence in fringe forums and late-night podcast speculation. So what do we actually have when we zoom out? A timeline that ends in a hallway behind a stage. A personality shaped by illness, loss, and control. A bandleader who supposedly documented everything, set against a present where almost nothing verifiable remains. A published set of journals that could clarify things but doesn't, because by design, parts of it are missing. The result is a negative image. You see the shape of James Rose most clearly in the empty spaces around him. This seems to be a repeated theme throughout the Wiki. Rose becomes a gravitational center you can't touch. Lila Roshan. According to this entry, Dr. Lila Roshan was born on June 12, 1962, in Belarus and immigrated to California with her parents in the 1970s. Her father was an engineer back in his home country. In the U.S., he ran a small grocery store. Her mother taught school. The page notes that Roshan rarely discussed her early years in Belarus. She earned a doctorate in psychology from UCLA, then moved into public-facing work through a publishing company called Fairman Media. We're talking books, lectures, seminars, the works. Her first book is The Acclaimed Clown, 1992. The Wiki frames it as the launch point, a mix of psychology, social critique, and identity that put her on the lecture circuit. The title that matters for this project is Determinism and Possibilities, 1996. The entry describes it as the clearest statement of her ideas, and the reason she became controversial outside academic spaces. Here's the core of that philosophy as the page presents it. Roshan thinks modern life trains people to treat pain as a malady that needs to be avoided or medicated away at all costs. Roshan argues the exact opposite. She says that pain can be a catalyst for deep change if you engage with it deliberately rather than fleeing from it. The phrase she uses for the outcome of that engagement is astral transfiguration. Of course, that sounds a bit out there, but the article is explicit that she means an internal shift. You know, how you perceive yourself and the world, rather than anything mystical. Apparently, the book outlines a tiered program for this kind of transformation, though the article doesn't list out the steps. But it's safe to say the scope is clearly much wider than just physical pain. Rashawn includes emotional and existential pain and connects all of it to attention, endurance, and the possibility of freedom from unconscious habits. That stance brings along a second theme, a critique of comfort. She argues that comfort and convenience, when treated as life goals, flatten a life until nothing meaningful breaks through. She links this to a broader cultural argument, a critique of American cultural myopia. Essentially, she challenged patriotic narratives, short historical memory, and the tendency to value productivity over interior depth and quality. The biography ends abruptly. In 2002, the page says Rashawn experienced a psychotic episode, became catatonic, and was institutionalized at Cascadia Wellness and Psychiatric Center in Culverton, Oregon. There aren't medical details beyond that. The entry labels her current status as long-term care and notes that discussions of her legacy mostly happen around the ideas in the books rather than new work. Perhaps Rashawn took her own ideas too seriously and went overboard with the whole pain fixation. Or perhaps she was just dealt an unfortunate hand in the genetic lottery. Or perhaps her institutionalization was political. Who can say? Why this matters for James Rose is laid out directly on his page. The Wiki summary of the journals of James Rose says that in 1997, he was reading Determinism and Possibilities. That is the extent of the connection we can responsibly claim from the material in front of us. The Wiki links them thematically and chronologically. We don't have Rashawn's program steps, and we don't have Rose's book in hand, just the site's summary and the cross-reference. So, what do we make of this? The short version is, I think Rashawn is dangerously compelling. I get why people fell for it. She's saying the quiet part out loud about comfort making us dull, and she does it with enough structure that it feels actionable, like stoicism with a cattle prod. I can see why that would sell, especially in the cultural malaise of the 90s. Still, the whole pain as liberation thing lives right next to rationalizations you can't walk back once they actually hurt someone. A program that asks you to lean into pain reads one way on paper and another way in a room with a microphone and a merge table. It's easy to spout platitudes like, there is nothing to fear but fear itself, and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's much more difficult to sit with real, actual pain. Look, I don't have her book. I have a summary that smooths the rough parts. That makes me a bit wary. Deepest layer. What even is this? All right, so at the risk of repeating myself, I just want to take a moment here to emphasize something. I've been digging into this for weeks, and I cannot find a single actual recording of this band, nor can I find any external evidence that they existed. No cassette rips, no old interviews, no weird fan blogs from 2008 talking about how this album changed my life, man. Nothing. And look, I know obscure bands exist and sometimes don't leave a trace on the internet. Not everything is going to have a cult revival or some underground forum dedicated to it. But this wiki insists that Family Reunion was a major force in shaping the Midwest shoegaze scene, which, again, does not exist. and it claims that they were a huge part of shoegaze overtaking grunge in the 90s, which also did not happen. This is really where I started to think, okay, this has to be some kind of alternate history project, some deeply esoteric ARG or meta-narrative art experiment, whatever you want to call it. And I was ready to accept that. I like weird internet projects. But then I went back to the homepage of the wiki, and that's when I realized this thing is not structured like a normal fan archive. So this is what greets you when you visit the wiki's homepage. It's called Records of the Obscure. I sort of skimmed past this at first because, well, the UI is sort of innocuous, and I just thought it was your run-of-the-mill wiki instance. And I was mainly focused on this non-existent band. But here, let's just read the text on the homepage. History is often described as an upward march towards some inevitable future. The myth of progress was crafted to reassure us that everything is under control. But this story is itself a construction, a carefully maintained illusion that obscures the obscene truth of reality itself. This reality cannot be immediately accessed by human means. Records of the Obscure is not uncovering some ultimate truth, but rather examining what has been deliberately and systematically ignored. The negative spaces that, in their absence, shape the various narratives that bring order to our world. In documenting these omissions, Records of the Obscure challenges the assumption of a clear trajectory and reveals that history, like all systems of meaning, is fractured, ambiguous, and shaped just as much by what is concealed as by what is shown. So now I'm thinking, okay, this isn't just a fan wiki. It's not even just an alt history experimental narrative type thing. Not exactly. This thing is aware that it's unreliable. It's telling me outright that its purpose isn't to document something true, as in the capital T truth of the matter. It's to document the negative space that ends up defining things because, without absence, there is no presence. That wording. This reads more like some Derrida nerd than any alt history book I've read. So what the hell is this thing? If this was just a wiki, even a weird ARG wiki, why would it be designed this way? And then I found this. It's a blog post from last November. I'll just read it for you. Reality as we perceive it is an assemblage of chosen fragments, only those events, ideas, and narratives permitted to linger in sight, while the remainder slips quietly into the ether. Erasure or exclusion of certain elements from the official record does not eliminate them entirely. Rather, it creates a negative space, kind of absence that exerts influence precisely because it has been concealed. Is it possible that what gets erased, what's actively left out, ends up carrying this weird, almost mythic weight precisely because people can't help but obsess over what isn't there? And doesn't this absence, this intentional void, somehow give the erased thing more reality than if it had just been allowed to exist quietly in the first place? Is it not okay to quietly exist? In tracing these absences, Records of the Obscure isn't searching for some clear truth. We're trying, desperately, to show that what's been stripped away holds a weight all its own. A weight that shapes our world as profoundly, maybe more so, than what we've been allowed to see. What if the world we know is shaped not by what's visible, but by what's kept hidden from view? Records of the Obscure exist to suggest that these erasures aren't just gaps, but a kind of noumena, quietly sculpting our sense of reality, giving weight and shape to everything we think we understand. You may view the data, but you cannot alter it. So what they're saying here is that the act of erasing something doesn't just make it disappear. Actually, it makes it more real than if it had just been allowed to exist normally. Like a memory you're trying to forget but can't. Like a name you read in a dream and wake up convinced you've heard it before. Like, I don't know, a band that was supposed to change the course of music history but somehow doesn't exist? Is that a stretch? This is the part where I start questioning if I'm just spiraling. Like, is this wiki actually weird, or am I making it weird because I've been staring at it for a month? And I think, no, it's weird. It's fucking weird. I haven't even gotten to the weirdest part yet. The talk pages. So eventually I came to the realization that the people who created Records of the Obscure, i.e. this idiosyncratic wiki instance, are distinct from the authors of the content related to Family Reunion. How do I know this? the talk pages. Essentially, these are discussions related to certain editorial choices made in the corresponding wiki articles. The talk pages are where everything changed for me. I don't know how to describe it. Up until this point, I was thinking of this as a puzzle, some weird art project, some metafictional labyrinth that someone, somewhere, designed to be uncovered. But the talk pages, they aren't written with the same cryptic, all-knowing tone as the articles. They're just music nerds arguing, picking apart details, making bad jokes, getting into passive-aggressive slap fights over meaningless shit. They sound exactly like every single music forum I've ever been on. But they're talking about something that doesn't exist. The creepy thing is, they're dated mostly from 2002 to 2005. After that, the chatter just ends, as far as I can tell at least. So what happened to these people? Did interest just sort of drop off? Doubtful. When they were posting, the wiki seemed to be a fairly active project, but after 2005, there was an abrupt stoppage. So let's index that little mystery for now and talk about what we do know. These people are characters. Let's break it down. This is what internet people do, right? We categorize them. Let's make a chart. Let's analyze their posting styles. This is just internet anthropology. The first thing to keep in mind is there are 3 highly active contributors: Ecosys, NewKing82, and Here's the Thing. Here I have done my best to characterize them based on the patterns I've observed over the course of reading a great deal of talk page discussions. At first, this was kind of fun. I almost wanted to assign them Jungian archetypes, but then I started noticing weird details. It was a throwaway comment, almost buried in a discussion about family reunions' first live recordings. Ecosys said something that made my stomach drop. She said, "I actually think I have a connection to the journalist who interviewed Fortson. I'll see if I can clean things up a bit when I have time. Haven't had a moment to myself all month. I have to report to the community center and clock a few hours tonight for debt compliance. Whomst among us? LOL. LMAO even." Which leads me to my next point. Debt compliance. That's what did it. That's the moment when all of this stopped being just an oddity, a weird wiki, a quirky internet puzzle, and became something else. Something I don't know how to explain. Because that phrase, debt compliance, that's not something people say. That's not a thing. Not in our world anyway. But Ecosys says it like it's normal. Like it's just a thing you do. Like it's part of life. Clocking hours at the community center. I can't stop thinking about that phrase, debt compliance. What the fuck does that mean? And then I started noticing other things that on their own didn't register as weird, but once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. NewKing82, casually mentioning that Dole's about to win a 3rd term. Here's the thing. Going on a rant about how state-funded music venues are subtly eroding culture itself, like that's just an accepted fact of reality. Ecosys, again, saying she's worried about losing references because official news sources no longer want to maintain the infrastructure. Like, is this something they've been dealing with for a while? I mean, sure, websites go down all the time. The internet is a fragile thing. We've all seen it happen. But they're talking about it like this is something systemic. Like they live in a world where information is constantly being erased, where history is being rewritten piece by piece. Which leads me to my next point. The erasure of Bob Temple. So yeah, there I was, refreshing the wiki for what felt like the 100th time in one sitting, when I stumbled across something I hadn't seen before, a talk page for Bob Temple. He's the music critic who wrote Immolate the Bait, or well, supposedly wrote it, if it actually existed. The thread was titled Urgent, Bob Temple source vanishing from the web, posted by this user NewKing82. Apparently, the link to Temple's excerpt on Indie Memoirs used to be perfectly fine, but now it's a 404. And according to NewKing, every reference to Immolate the Bait has mysteriously vanished from the entire internet. Bookstore databases, archived blog posts, the works. It's like some cosmic entity just snapped its fingers and poof, the book never existed. That alone would be bizarre, but what really freaked me out was how the other users responded, like this wasn't an isolated incident. Ecosys, who seems to be the wiki's designated archivist, chimed in right away, basically confirming that Immolate the Bait is gone. Then you've got Here's the Thing dropping cryptic comments about the Ides of March and the Duelist regime, which, I mean, that might be normal in their world, but from where I'm sitting, it's giving me goosebumps. And then Ecosys comes back with a warning. Be careful what you say on here, as if someone or something is actively monitoring these talk pages for I don't even know what. Reading that was the moment I realized this isn't just some fan wiki that forgot to pay its hosting fees. Something more is going on. Like some governmental organization is systematically removing all traces of Bob Temple's work. But if that's the case, why do these talk page posts still exist? Why wasn't that deleted too? At this point, I can't tell if these people are fully immersed in an ARG or if they're living in a parallel universe where Michael 2 and, by extension, Immolate the Bait are both real, and they're watching it all get slowly erased from history in real time. Either way, it's unsettling. I found myself screenshotting these talk pages like they were some priceless artifacts. I just had this creeping fear that if I refreshed the page too many times, the entire conversation might get scrubbed, or maybe I won't be able to find it again. So that's where I'm at. Stuck between this is too elaborate to be fake and this is obviously fake, but in a way that's freaking me out more than if it were real. In short, help. Because I'm in way too deep, and these talk pages are basically doubling as my new bedtime story, complete with existential dread. And now, a little preview of where my research is leading. The being. Okay, so I debated whether or not to even bring this up in the video because we're already deep in the realm of like quasi-fictional epistemology and digital hauntings. But I guess if you've made it this far, you're already invested in the absurdity of all this. So let's just go one step further. Just one. Famous last words, right? There's this thing, this presence mentioned throughout the wiki in little footnotes and what seem to be inside jokes in various talk pages. Just scattered mentions and one recurring image that feels like it's following me around. A little blue guy. Yes, a literal tiny blue guy. So here's what I've gathered at this stage. The being starts off as some kind of mascot, or no, that's the wrong word. A marginal character, like literally living in the margins. It shows up in the liner notes of Worthless, which is an early family reunion single I will once again remind you I cannot verify exists outside of this wiki. Anyway, James Rose supposedly drew this thing in. The wiki says it was kind of an all-knowing figure, just a weird little guy who interrupts the liner notes to say shit like, he wanted to call it Morris Daydream but got talked out of it. Stuff like that. Completely unsolicited commentary. And then here's the twist. It gets corporatized. Lurch, being the omnivorous tech music conglomerate that it is, or was, takes the being and crams it into their consumer OS, Skate 94, as a helpful assistant. So imagine Clippy, but with a bit of a god complex. None of this is confirmed, obviously. There seems to be a debate about whether or not the being should have been its own page. And I get it. It's marginal. It's not essential, which, side note, is always how people used to talk about dissociation before they gave it a diagnostic weight. But whatever, here's why I care. This encrypted index I found, index.db.enc, it behaves like something is curating what I'm allowed to see, deliberately. And the more I read about the being, the more I wonder if that's what it is. Like, maybe this whole system is being filtered through something. Some logic, some presence, some little digital angel that thinks it's doing you a favor by withholding the truth until you're truly ready to hear it. And, okay, maybe I'm projecting. Maybe I'm anthropomorphizing a UX pattern. Maybe I've been staring at this thing too long and now I'm seeing a personality behind the opacity. Like one of those horror games where the UI slowly becomes the antagonist. But doesn't that kind of make sense? If the archive's entire premise is that history is shaped by erasure, that absence is what gives things weight, then the being is the thing doing the erasing, or at least choosing what we're allowed to see. And now I keep seeing it. Not like literally, don't worry, I'm not hallucinating yet, but in the design, in the way the homepage rotates featured pages like a tarot deck, in the way search results sometimes vanish after you click them once. I keep thinking about what it means to build something that acts like it knows what you're ready to handle. Not in a patronizing way either, more like a very tired parent trying to explain death to a kid in an honest way without completely traumatizing them. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe the being is just a funny little guy someone drew on a napkin while high, and now it's spiraled into this weird cross-brand mythos. Or maybe it's the only real character in this whole narrative. The rest of us are just playing catch-up. Anyway, I'll dig into it more. Next video, maybe. If it lets me.